One of the most frustrating things about being an instructor in an applied ethics class or a beginning ethics class or introduction to ethics, whatever you want to call that introductory level where you're just finding out about ethical questions, is that people like to make fun of it. They like to say, oh, but those kinds of problems never come up. This is all pie in the sky, people making up problems just to have problems. You used to say that about rationing drugs. Oh, that's just a pie in the sky problem. That'll never happen. We just went through a time where we did not have enough vaccines for everybody. So we made a decision on how to ration the vaccine. An ethical decision had to be made. And for those of you who object that it's a political decision, I'm simply going to give Aristotle back to you. Politics is merely ethics writ large. And let us not forget that Plato, in order to explain the idea of justice in a person, began by trying to describe justice in a state. So the political and the ethical, basically interchangeable. Yesterday, right about bedtime, which I guess is to say this morning, I read an article from Time magazine. It appeared online right about noon on April 15th, in which we are told that researchers have scientifically created the first human-monkey chimera. That is to say, we have succeeded in taking human cells, putting them into the embryo of a simian relative of ours, and for 20 days it lived. It only was terminated because it was considered that to let it live any longer ran the risk of crossing ethical boundaries. Again, this is the sort of thing we've been talking about in philosophy classes for years. I'm always reminded whenever we get involved in this kind of discussion with Robert Heinlein's short story, Jerry Was a Man. In it, Martians, because Martians, we all know about them, Martians have come to Earth and are making what he describes as essentially superficial changes. It's not so much that chimpanzees are incapable intellectually of talking now, but rather that the structures of their lips and mouth and vocal cords keep them from expressing themselves as one human would express itself to some other human. As a result, the matter is investigated, and the decision is that this anthropoid worker is a man. And that was just cosmetic changes. As I say, they're complex cosmetic changes. They're not just surgical procedures. It involves genetic manipulations and things like that. But the point being made is that chimpanzees, as they are probably as bright, certainly as any 4-year-old, possibly brighter. We just don't know because we can't converse with them in a way that makes them as gracious as us, at least in our eyes. They probably think the other way about us. You have to be thinking about these things. The world is not going to hold still. We didn't get a chance to have much of an argument in the public arena about what was the moral thing to do. It was just sort of slapped on us. But what if it was wrong? What if we should have, in fact, spent all of our vaccine opportunity on getting people back into the workplace and just told the elderly, we're taking a pass on you. If you live, you live. If you die, you die. What's more important is get the economy going. How do you object to that? Why do you object to that if you do? And if you don't object to it, why don't you? These are all fundamentally emerging out of our values, and we need to be examining these values all the time. And we need to examine the implications of these values all the time. This is not just something for an ethics class. Well, I always tell my ethics students, I don't care what your field is. If you're a chemist, if you're a biologist, if you're an engineer, if you're a healthcare worker, if you're going to be a kindergarten teacher, if you're going to dig ditches, the most important class you will take is your ethics class. Nobody seems to believe me. But for the 8th, 9th time this year, a major ethical question erupts in front of us and we don't even know what to do. So things get done while we're standing around trying to figure out what we're going to do because we haven't thought it through in advance. And again, there are people who will say, well, you can't do that. You can't do that. Oddly enough, you can. People do exactly that. When the military trains for an operation, they carry out the operation. You tell an athlete, this is what we need you to do on this play, they do it on that play. You can know what your future behavior will be if you think about it first, practice it in advance, and are confident in all the decisions and all the courses of action you have said, I will carry out in the future. Oh, sure. A football player forgets what was the play called. Somebody might freeze in combat who's never frozen before. These things do happen. Accidents do happen. I'm not trying to say we're all perfect human beings who can think things through in advance and know what's going to happen 100%. But we can be sure with a pretty high percent of accuracy. We can know how we will behave almost all the time if we think about it first. If you only talk about it with yourself, you ought to be talking about it and keep on talking philosophy.